Hi, and welcome back to another episode of The Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Boyson, and this week my guest is Regan Caruthers, author and spiritual teacher. Thanks for coming, Regan.
Of course. I'm so happy to be here.
So, I always say how I met my guest, and we met when I was teaching a dance class. And then over the years, we had these parallel lives where we had more and more in common until Regan had some dramatic life changes recently that prompted her to write a new book. So we're going to learn all about this in the realm of where does faith, where does our intuition, where does meditation, where does all this fall in living a healthy life for the long term? So let's start, Regan. How did you even get headed in the direction where you are now, where there was some kind of awakening that there were either practices you needed to do or just live differently than you were before?
Aw, it's a good question. I've been at this a long time. I will be 58 in January, and I first learned meditation at the age of 3. So I don't know what the word is, privileged, I guess. I went to a grade school where we meditated every day, and we were guided in visualization. We were taught Tai Chi as an alternative to phys ed. We did Tai Chi instead. We would occasionally photograph our energy field with Carillion film. Every day in morning assembly, we would sing songs about God and divine love and conscious thought and prayer. So these things got, baked in early. And I will say, because I am highly sensitive, psychic, intuitive, right? And when I was little, that was all pretty overwhelming. So the teachings of my grade school were very comforting in a way, as well as opening. And so I was getting more information than I knew how to manage. And I dramatically, at the age of 9, after seeing this entity, for lack of a better word, that used to like harass me and follow me around, and he scared he just terrorized me this one particular morning. And I just screamed out loud for it all to stop. And it did. Like the
Oh my
veil came
God.
down, and I was a normal kid. Not at all. I was living in a home with a mentally ill mother and a violent stepfather. Um, there was a lot to process and a lot to deal with. And so shutting down my psychic gifts and my connection to God was my 9-year-old way of coping. And it wasn't until I had a dramatic awakening at the age of 27, which I'm happy to share with your listeners, where that same entity that used to chase me around and scare me at night and all of that literally woke me up in the middle of the night in my hotel suite in San Francisco, where I was a junior executive at a national sales meeting. And this same being came to visit in the middle of the night, and my eyes were closed. I was sleeping, and I just knew someone was in my room. I could feel it. And I opened my eyes, and there he is. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, it's you. It's only you. I'm not afraid of you." And I went back to sleep. And the following morning, all I could feel was unconditional love and the love of God um, in my being. So I guess that little demon was trying to teach me that lesson the whole time. I often think about, wow, if I had just, not been afraid of this thing and chose to have a loving and emotionally sovereign response like I did at 27, I just wonder what, things could have been like for me through my childhood. But anyway, so that, brought back all of my innate gifts and the teachings, the wisdom teachings of my early education. So life, life changed.
Wow. And I want to dive in on that a little bit. because as I've dabbled a little bit in Christianity as a person who was never religious my entire life, there's this question of is an entity divine or not? And you use the word demon.
That's what he
T-
looked like. That's what he looked
wow.
like. Doesn't mean that he was. I don't know. That was just what my little girl mind made sense of. I mean, he was a man. He was a man with kind of this fiery attitude, and he often was like in regal settings, like sitting in a like throne. And I don't know. I don't
So
know.
your acceptance and you said emotional sovereignty, your neutrality around it,
Mhm.
then gave you a connection to the divine rather than running away from it or
Yeah, and frankly, I think that is what the point of a spiritual practice is can you be in conscious relationship and loving acceptance of all of it? And that doesn't mean that you love and accept it to make it okay or to justify it. Um, I mean, that thread all the way to forgiveness, right? Um, when we forgive, we don't bypass the truth, though I used to. I used to leap right over stuff. But anyway, if we truly do the work, we we enter the depths of whatever that is, the authentic feelings of terror, of fear, whatever, right? Like we are honest about it and we process it all the way through and we find the blessing because everything has a blessing, right? And ideally, when we get to that forgiveness destination, it's like saying, actually, what you did is so not okay that I choose not to be connected to it anymore.
mm,
And that is forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is a way through love of saying, you know what, I'm done. I forgive you. I'm not letting this live in my neurological system, my energetic system anymore.
mm.
So,
Wow. So your spiritual, your psychic powers reawakened at
mhm,
27.
mhm.
And then what?
Well, my life changed, as you might imagine. And because I was truly awakened, right? Awakened to what I would say is the truth, the true nature of reality. Um, Everything needed to change in a way. Starting with work. So I was this junior executive in the academic publishing industry. Um, that didn't fit anymore, right? I learned much later that my ancestry actually is from the academic publishing industry. I didn't know that. So that was kind of funny. But anyway, I decided pretty, pretty quickly to find a way to teach people the consequences of the stress response and to teach them alternative ways of responding to stuff. Because what I had seen at work, being quickly promoted, and, I was managing like, I think it was like a 25 million dollar, like thing. So access to the company heads, I mean, this was the dream, right? To climb the corporate mountaintop. Remember, I was completely asleep to my gifts and to my understanding, right? So it was climb, climb, climb. Corporate ascension will create safety. That was the unconscious belief, that was running. And it was a very toxic environment. And I saw a lot of bad behavior. I saw people mistreated. I saw sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. I saw people fired without cause because they were trying to hold people account to their incompetence, right? All of it. And so that was the setting of the awakening in my hotel room was all this stress. And I had learned that a colleague had been raped. That
Oh,
kind of took me over the edge. And so it was in that context of such extreme stress and fear and just seeing bad shit that I awakened, right? And so after the awakening, I was like, gosh, how could I help people not create the kinds of things I just awakened from, if that makes sense? And I wasn't like going to a library or something. It was all done energetically. And I, quickly found the work of the Heart Math Institute and was highly resonant. And I flew out. I, was living in St. Louis at the time. And I flew out to Boulder Creek and came to my first Heart Math retreat in 1995. And I just knew in my heart that that was what I was supposed to do. And I was given kind of this open invitation to become part of the staff by their CEO. And it took me about 5 years. And yeah, packed up the station wagon and headed west to be staff at the Heart Math Institute. And that was in 99. So
So for
very early in the history of the Institute, the Institute had just opened in the early 90s. So, not many people had heard of it, and certainly not the corporations that I was trying to engage and all of that. So
how, yeah, heart math is,
it
at
was
least in the circles I run, so well known. And yet, for our listeners who might not have tried it, how about just a very high level explanation for how it works or what it looks like as a practice? And we're not going to go too deep into this because I want to
sure.
get back to the big story.
Yeah, I mean, heart math basically is packaging ancient wisdom in a Western biomedical model. Right. So it basically teaches you how to access elevated emotion, higher frequency energy at will when you need it. So in that moment when you're triggered or you're angry or you're dysregulated, what do you do? Well, heart math is the answer to the what do you do? And then there are other practices that you do that help that in the moment intervention be more accessible and impactful and easier to do. So,
And at the
yeah.
baseline, there's a simple technology that helps you get the biofeedback
Yeah,
of.
it's funny because when I was staff there and teaching at Motorola and different things, we didn't have any technology. So people think of heart math as the technology. I was there so early, that's not a connection I make. But yes, they do have technology where you can see in real time your heart rate variability, the rhythm of your heart, which is an incredible window of overall health in the autonomic nervous system. So you can see that in real time, and it measures how much coherence. So that's, alignment of the brain and the heart through the vagus nerve, how coherent that relationship is, basically. All that gets measured in the technology. So it's helpful, but in the moment, it's not going to help you. In the
Okay, I have
moment,
a
you need to have mastery of the tools, but the technology helps you understand and see the effectiveness of,
so it's
basically.
a much bigger set of practices. Yeah. So I have a question while we're here, though. You mentioned triggered so that
Mhm.
you're able to have a more coherent response. What is a coherent response at times? Anger, like righteous anger, is that a coherent response, or is that?
I can't say. I mean, anger is never coherent
Mm,
energetically. It will never have an energetic imprint of coherence.
hmm.
Um, and as you may know, anger, whether you're righteous or justified in your anger or not, has a biochemical consequence. So to me, it's more about choice. Do you have choice running in your system when you choose to be angry? That's a very different thing, to be in the moment and say, I am consciously making this choice. I need to have a strong boundary here. This person really needs to understand the violation that I'm perceiving, and I'm going to speak to that in a very strong way. Very different from anger, where you're just screaming at somebody and you're, not terribly articulate in your message to that person about why you're having this energetic, kind of response. So that would be kind of just my question is, are you choosing anger?
Mm,
If
mm.
you are, okay. But if it's just a reaction unconsciously to whatever, then probably not a great choice.
Cool. So heart math was one of the uh, practices and communities within which you kept evolving your
It
your own
definitely helped.
mind
Yeah.
body connection.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is that later in my life, when I really started doing the work, I mean, my awakening was just this grace that I was given. I don't know why I was given that. I really don't. And that elevated consciousness lasted for about 3 years. So, I mean, it was a significant change. And just like anything, if you're not disciplined, right, it's going to fade. You're not going to stay enlightened in the absence of practice. And so, what I learned to do later was much deeper work, still using the energy of love, right? So, the heart math process helps you really connect to the energetics of love and of gratitude. And you can go higher than that to a more divine, transcendent kind of expression. So, heart math helps you to do that. But what people don't usually realize is that when you're triggered, I would say without exception, it's a call from your unhealed self. In that, if I was sitting with you having the same experience and yet having a completely different response, that means there's nothing innate in what's happening that assigns the meaning. We as individuals assign meaning. And often when we have that sort of explosive, um, lack of a better word, negative emotional response, it's because there's an aspect of ourselves is unhealed, and this situation is triggering that. So, how can you bring the energy of love into these unhealed places of self and offer literally loving witness, right? So, we all have traumatic imprints. We all have ways that we've chosen to cope with shit. Like for me, that was corporate ascension, right? Like I was going to create emotional safety by material success. It's a pretty common thing that runs in this society, you know? Um, that clearly wasn't going to do it, right? What was going to do it was for me to identify all of these unhealed aspects of myself. Who are they? Maybe even name them. Oh, her name is Shirley, or this is Alice, or whatever. Name all of it. Understand its point of view, right? So, me growing up in a violent home with a mentally ill mother, where she would sometimes sleep till 3 in the afternoon when I was an infant, and she would find me making my own sandwich at like 18 months, right? So, for me, what ran in my system was I can't count on anybody for anything, right? I can't trust anyone. So that aspect of self got made. I chose to respond to that threat by, you know what? I am going to be the most competent, have my shit together person as a way of creating safety. No, what that part of me needs is for me to hold loving witness, say, hey, I'm here. I love you. Tell me everything. Not making that aspect of me wrong, but just being in relationship where she lets me know why she doesn't trust, why she works so hard, whatever. And I just hold her and I say, I understand that. That makes perfect sense. And I love you and I accept you. And in time, you know what you and I are going to do? we're going to respond to stuff differently than that because that's exhausting. We're tired, right? So this is what we're going to try instead, et cetera, et cetera. And really doing that, deep unpacking, which was, a practice that I kind of just created. I don't know, maybe I read it somewhere. I don't think so. It's an integral part of my Ready to Awaken courses that I develop and teach. But it's really important to love all of it and to know who's in there and what their perspective is. Because again, going back to being triggered, it's one of those.
Kind of like you accepting that demon.
A little
You had
bit.
to, yeah, you had to accept that it was there. And what about your journey towards a better relationship with the loving higher power? Because what I find is sometimes we get triggered because we're so much more attached to someone or something near us than
Mm.
to all that is, and therefore we feel threatened because we're elevating something, whether it's a practice, it's material success, whether it's idolizing a person or putting something or someone on a pedestal. How did you end up making that strong, keeping that practice of strong devotional connection?
I think because it was baked in when I was little, even though I rejected it, right, to fit in and have social acceptance, because if I was socially accepted, that means I had places to go, right? That means I had sleepovers, I had safe places. So I was very strategic in my social ascension. It was a way to stay safe. But to your question, the devotional singing, the time in the heart when I was little, right? Like when we're little, I think we all know what being in relationship with God feels like. And I think it gets enculturated out of us. I think most little kids have a multidimensional relationship with reality, right? They see things that adults don't. They have friends that no one else can see. They're scared of certain things. There's monsters under the bed, whatever. Like we have this innate relationship, I think. Not everybody, because some people have so much trauma in utero, like it's hard that gets disrupted. But if you know, and I knew as a kid, that this thing we call God, this person, right, this man, I mean, if there wasn't a better use of the word they with all this pronoun stuff, God, like, don't call it a he, call it, I don't know, anything else. Anyway, that I'm going off on a tangent here, but love is God. All the rest, the man with the long beard and the notepad, taking notes about who's naughty and nice and punishing, like that's all human stuff. That's what the humans made up. That has nothing to do with God. And so I don't know, I came in knowing that. And for whatever reason, I had this innate orientation to love. Like, how we doodle on our like school folders and stuff. I always doodled love in these big interconnected bubble letters that very much reflected the hippie designs of the 70s, right? That was all I wrote. And then like songs like Nicolette Larson, It's Going to Take a Lot of Love to Change the Way Things Are. Like that was my anthem as a kid. I don't know. I was just always hardwired for that felt sense of God, which is, yeah, a love that I can't really describe. And it's not out here. And in fact, in my yoga classes, when I'm trying to create this bridge between what Jesus taught and the yogic tradition, right? And I have people close their eyes. And I talk about, in Luke, Jesus is, quoted as saying, the kingdom of God is within you. So I asked people with their eyes closed, I said, okay, so point to where you believe that kingdom is. And without exception, Deb, they go like this. So
Touching your heart. Yeah.
we know. We just are manipulated, frankly, out of our knowing.
Hmm. And you recently completed your book, Tragic Magic. I love the name.
We did.
What? There it is, Tragic Magic. It's being released November 4th, which is Monday. That was
Mhm.
another trigger for us meeting today, a catalyst, a healthy
Yeah,
catalyst.
thank you.
Uh, what prompted you to write that? And how much of that book is in this realm of knowing, heartfelt knowing?
Yeah, I mean, the book is my story. And it reads a lot like fiction, going back to what my ancestors experienced. That's where the book begins, right? So it shares a lot. And like the title, right? Um, I mean, I remember when I wrote the sentence, I was talking about growing up with my mom, and I said living with her was tragic magic. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a good way of describing the story. So that's became the title. So I mean, I share my life and what I learned, and how I ultimately alchemized the trauma of my childhood.
Mm.
And I mean, I guess that one of the more significant threads that runs through my story is heeding the call, right? Like knowing the voice of higher wisdom ever since I was a kid. Yeah, turning it off and then it comes back on, right? But all along, being obedient to this higher knowing and to its point of view and doing what it says. And, you know, I mean, I can share, I don't
Yes,
want too many
that.
spoilers, but, I pray and meditate. That's my jam. That's what I do. And this was in December of 21. So COVID in California was still happening. I think we were still locked down. And so I needed to travel to write because the house was too many humans and no quiet, right? So I went to Joshua Tree, rented an Airbnb, got out of the Santa Cruz COVID madness. In fact, there's a chapter in my book called Madness, all about my point of view on that whole thing. Anyway, so I'm in Joshua Tree, I'm quiet, hanging out. And the prayer that I always begin with, and I'll offer this to your listeners, is I close my eyes, I bring my focus into the heart, and I say, sweet loving spirit, angels of love and of light, my guides, ancestors of the highest vibration and intention, my beloved Yeshua, Mary Magdalene, and Aset, I ask you to be with me. I humbly ask to be an agent of the highest good for the resources, the insights, and the people that I need to live that to come forth. I intend and I promise obedience to divine guidance. And I am so grateful for your presence and for your help. Okay, so that is how I would begin writing. And on this particular day or night in Joshua Tree, I'm just hanging out. And the voice says, you need to urgently move home. And that's it. Doesn't say you need to urgently move home because of X, Y, and Z. Just says that, nothing more. And I know the truth of it. So I come out of meditation, I check my cell phone to see if I have enough bars to make a phone call because I'm in the middle of nowhere. And I do. And I call a friend in St. Louis, which is where I grew up. I had left, as I mentioned, in 99 to work at HeartMath. So that was home. That was, urgently move home. That's St. Louis. And I'm like, okay, God, sure, if you say so. So I call a friend. I see I have the bars to do so. She's a realtor in St. Louis. And I said, God says I have to urgently move home. And I do what I'm told.
Mm.
I said, will you work with me to find where God wants me to be? She said, of course. I said, okay, I'm flying out of Palm Springs in the morning.
Ah,
So everybody else, thinks this is very dramatic and irrational and doesn't feel that way to me at all. And I know the truth of divine guidance. I know what it sounds like, right? So we quickly sell the house. We live right on the beach in this gorgeous home. Everybody thinks I am out of my effing mind, right? And instead of going to St. Louis, I just didn't feel resonant there. God says Franklin County. I'm like, okay, God, I don't even know what that means. So I tell Andrea, my realtor, I said, God says Franklin County. What does that mean? So we open up, the search and I see the home where I now live. And I'm like, God, that looks amazing. I'm on 10 acres here. I have a beautiful building that I renovated for my yoga center. It was checking all the boxes, except it said nothing about water. And as you know, being in Santa Cruz, like I had $400 water bills in Soquel Creek Water District, right? Like I wasn't going to do that. And I believe that in the future, not in my lifetime, I don't think, well, maybe, depends how long I live, water is going to be a problem. So I really did want to have my own. But there was nothing in the description about that. So I said to the realtor, let's go see it anyway. It feels right. And, we can't have everything. So we come out to Washington, Missouri, which is about an hour west of St. Louis. And I, pull in with Andrea, and here comes Dale on the golf cart up the driveway, and he's waving and he's smiling. And I don't think I've said anything to him. Maybe hello. And he looks at me, goes, young lady, I should mention, we've got a geothermal well here. It was like literally the first thing out of his mouth, not in response to my question. And so I was like, okay, God, got it. All right. So that was December. We move here in March. So in March, we are here. We have moved. Everyone thinks I'm nuts. I know it's right. I can't explain why it's right. I just know it is. And 2 months later, again in meditation, I'm told I have to urgently go to a doctor.
mm,
I don't go to Western doctors because they don't heal anything. No offense, Western doctor, but it's been my experience you just prescribe medicine to stuff, which is about suppressing symptoms, but not dealing with cause. So that just never made much sense to me. But God's telling me to go to the doctor. I'm like, okay, God. And you know what doctors do? The first thing they do is they listen to your heart.
I didn't. I forgot that.
So this doctor listens to my heart, this country doctor, Craig Wholesome, this sweet country doctor. And it's not like I haven't had my heart listened to, right? I mean, things happen. You go to urgent care for something. So it's not like I had two babies. I mean, it's not like nobody's listened to my heart. Anyway, he said, Reagan, something's terribly wrong. We need to get you scheduled for an echocardiogram as quickly as, we can. I'm like, okay, what's that? So I learned it's, this ultrasound, right? And I think the test is the next day. Things can move fast in the country. You don't wait 3 months to see a doctor, right? So very quick. And that's when I learned I was dying.
Mm.
So I had a birth defect. Apparently, I was born with a broken heart. And yeah, which when you read my story, you'll understand why I was born with a broken heart. And I needed my aortic valve replaced. Well, in St. Louis, Barnes Hospital, which is where I happened to be born, which is part of Washington University of St. Louis School of Medicine. So one of the best medical schools in the country. Top 5, I think, for sure. Just happens to be one of the best places in the world for aortic valve replacement. And Ralph Damiano, who was my surgeon, who runs everything at Barnes, he's the head of cardiothoracic surgery there, just happens to be one of the best in the world for this. So that is why God told me I needed to urgently move home. If your listeners know anything about Santa Cruz, that's not where you want to have an aortic valve replacement at Dominican Hospital. No thanks. Maybe if you sprain an ankle, go there, but that's about it. Yeah. So
Wow.
it's a big wow. It's a
And
big
you
wow.
made it, obviously. And I won't spoil the end of your book for the listeners, but
Mhm.
you definitely your obedience and faith and emergency medicine,
Yeah,
all
I
of
mean,
it
like I
to
said
the
to
perfect.
Damiano, like I don't believe in doctors, but I can get behind a surgeon. 'Cause,
Emergency medicine, yeah. I've switched to calling what we call this stuff. I've switched to calling it emergency medicine because it's unparalleled in the power to revive and but
yeah,
and I agree with a lot of what you have. We
yeah.
need to
But
listen to our bodies, and often, suppressing symptoms isn't a long-term plan. So I'm with you all the way. How okay? So and before we started recording, we talked a little bit about simple practices to start to evolve this uh, knowingness, and this knowingness you've already alluded to. A lot of it has to do with creating the space in your mind, in your home or your
in
schedule,
your
whatever, this
in your
space
heart.
to feel in your heart, or
Yeah,
space
I
to
don't
feel your heart. Tell me about that.
well, I don't believe you can actually heal through the mind alone. I just that will never happen. That just isn't going to happen. It's why therapy traditionally doesn't work, because we go in to talk about our problems, thereby fortifying all the neural connections that we have around our problems. And then the more you focus on a problem, the bigger the problem becomes. And then you are connected and conditioned to be living in the energetics of the problem. And through energetic resonance, then you attract and draw more problems to you. I mean, it's a hot mess. So to me, what changes everything is love, is the felt sense of it, not thinking about love, the actual felt sense. And so you can begin, right, just by closing your eyes and connecting to a feeling of gratitude, of love, of hope, of peace, of contentment. I mean, I don't care what you name it, just some higher frequency, higher vibration emotion, and sit with your eyes closed and feel that. And as you do, as you begin to change the energetic environment that you're living in, right, the more grateful you are, the more focused on experiencing a feeling of love, again, that gets bigger, right? Just like focusing on the negative thing and talking about the negative thing and living in the energetics of, the trauma or whatever. This begins to change you energetically. And the thing that's so interesting about the mind and why it's so hard to change by mind alone is we have this thing called the amygdala. It's part of our mind, right? It's like the repository of all of our emotional memories. So it's holding these things and it's also looking for matches in the sensory world. And when it sees a match, there's a fight or flight response because it perceives a threat, right? But it could be just somebody new at work who looks like Harry, a bully you knew in grade school. So you hate the new guy at work, but he's really sweet, but you're triggered because of the trauma, right? So the more you focus on these memories where you feel love and gratitude, That then gets contributed in the amygdala, and you begin to change the ratio of memories that are housed there. And you naturally, over time, the more love you feel, the less triggered you are because your amygdala isn't seeing these sensory matches between what's stored and what's one is experienced because you've changed the ratio of the stuff that is stored. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, you're shifting the possible number of matches, you know, to whatever energy you're seeding yourself with. Before we started recording, we also talked a little bit about how one of my own experiences was of spiritual bypassing, where I
Mm,
would just act like everything was okay, even if just oh, that's cool, and kind of this badge of honor of not caring. This like,
mm,
oh yeah, oh you go do that crazy stuff. Oh, I'll a tolerance. I would almost say is what it is, like showing that I was high vibration because I could tolerate anything, not that it was something good, or even that. And we discussed briefly, Jesus uh, th- throwing out over the tables, just so. How would you, and I get it, like, yeah, let's fill the heart bank because the heart's electromagnetic field is 6 times stronger than the brain's, the mind's. uh that's why probably the social distancing was 6 feet apart, is to get this despair, this feeling of despair amongst the COVID uh rules. At the same time, yeah, how do you, okay, well, this also reminds me that when I have had a practice of making space, it sounds like what you're saying is not only making space, it's planting the seed at a deep level of what you want. And the mind chatter, I've definitely have been where I could just chatter my way away with a therapist and have no positive change at all, and get in the same self reinforcing mind loop. So feeling the heart, seeding the heart, uh, and that'll bring us more into alignment with all that is, I suppose. How do you avoid spiritual bypassing?
by not doing it.
And how would we know we're doing it? Because I didn't know I was doing it. I had this idea unconditional love just meant you put up with anything.
Well, ideally, you would have a teacher that would tell you that is bullshit, right? To me, it's like the energy of love, right? Creating that capacity is like your chaperone. You use it as your
Mm.
companion because there's safety in this love, right? There's wisdom in this love, there's accepting in this love. And we're going to go on a field trip. And we're going to go to all the dark, stuck, terrifying places because even in your practice of spiritual bypassing, you probably wouldn't deny things that had happened when you were a kid that were painful. Maybe you were spiritually bypassing about, oh, but it's all okay because look at where I am now or whatever. But you at least had capacity to be honest and to name traumas that had taken place, in the past. So what I would suggest, right, is in that capacity of connection to love, you say, okay, let's go visit the inner 2-year-old, who witnessed my mom trying to kill herself, right? Like let's go there and let's take that love and let's let that 2-year-old know how loved she is, how she is ultimately going to experience safety. She's going to know how to do it. She's going to find trustworthy relationships because she's so worthy of that. And that her trauma, the terror that she feels, isn't going to be hidden away and abandoned by me or not looked at because it doesn't jive with a good vibes only kind of bumper sticker
What
BS.
about when you encounter that in other people? I think your acceptance of it, because you filled yourself up, your acceptance of that pain in other people doesn't mean it makes you less likely to attach to it or let it fill you as well. When you're filled up, that's one thing I honestly learned too. I was doing some energetic clearing, and we're often very permeable when we've been through too much loss in too short of a time. And then if we haven't filled ourselves with the nourishing, the the
Energy.
yeah, then you can, there
Mhm.
is negative energy. Bad energy can creep into the places where they're just like minerals. If you don't have enough nourishing minerals, the toxic heavy metals plug right in where the happy metals would have been. So what you're telling me, and I see how I did it. I mostly was a master at making space. I could meditate for 2 hours. I would just make all this space. But was I planting the seed like you did with your prayer or like you did with your intention and feeling it in your heart center? No, I can't say that I was at all. It actually, but I did learn to hear like bold words. It would just like in an hour, I just get one. It's just the only thing is why. That's all I got. Why? And I was in the middle of this misunderstanding with someone, and that person was very dysregulated. And I learned that instead of creating some sort of weird dispute, I just said, "Oh, why?" And then they would say something else. I was like, "What?" And it was magical to have gotten back to that place. And honestly, this desire I have to share great teachings from people like you, it was one of those things, one of those 2 hour meditations, and my throat, it was in my throat, like you have to say, you have to speak. Uh, so tell me this. Um, I know you mentioned on your website, regancaruthers.com, ReganCaruthers.com, one R, that you have
Mhm.
a list of really simple ways to get started. And we've overlapped with some of those. One is
Sure.
have a practice of listening and taking, and having a gratitude. Two is feeling in your heart space and seeding it with positive things. Any other of those things that are listed on your website that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, sure. Learning a simple breathwork practice, just a couple of minutes, right? It's not like you have to dedicate an afternoon to it. I have, just a simple yogic breathing kind of practice on my website, easy to learn, good to practice. Heart-centered breathing is good to practice as well. A simple walk out in nature, right? We are so disconnected from the natural world. Not all of us, but most of us. And we are that world. We are an interconnected aspect of that larger world, right? So, a little mindfulness, right? Just feeling your feet on the earth as you walk, taking in the sounds, even if that's human voices, like wherever you are, um, just taking that in, being mindful, right? Aware of the present moment and taking the beauty. We live in such a beautiful place. I mean, there's beauty everywhere. Wherever you are, there is a beautiful place you can go that's a short drive or bike ride or walk from where you are. So yeah, I would really recommend that. Closing your eyes, tuning in, getting honest, right? So when we close our eyes in a practice, maybe the practice is you're just bringing compassionate observation to whatever's running, not
Hmm.
fixing it or trying to change it. Just close your eyes for 2 minutes and just bring some compassionate observation to yourself.
That was one of, maybe it was Kyle, somebody, I can't remember, but I used to take some of his classes online at a kind of comedic, lighthearted, spiritual work. And I remember I hadn't had the idea that meditation, even more than what was happening in that moment, was the cascade of all the things that happened all day long. Kind of like the breath work isn't so much even what you're doing biochemically right at that moment. It's not even that change that you have in your mind at that moment, but that it's going to have a ripple effect out
Mhm.
across your whole day. And I remember I used to have this feeling of anxiety, like, oh, 5 minutes or 15 minutes, I'm going to listen. And there's a lot of chatter. So there's value in listening to the chatter. But I found that I calmed down quite a bit when I realized it wasn't about getting anything done. It wasn't even about a specific trying to control my thoughts or place them and manipulate them. More of that process of kind of draining out the monkey chatter, giving myself the time and then the trust that that over the long term is going to be showing up. It's the same with the kind of movement, organic alignment, natural alignment work that I do, where there are simple things. They look just too simple to work, and then, but because you're disrupting your existing pattern, a light disruption to an existing pattern can have far-reaching effects, and we get out of that grasping, struggling, controlling. In fact, if I wish I knew this idea of the devil earlier, was control. When you're trying to control someone else or something else. So here's one last practical question. So let's say you see, well, sometimes we can't see ourselves in a loop. Sometimes it takes someone else to see us in a loop, or we see someone else in a loop. Let's say you had a family or a friend member, you just see this recurrent loop they're getting in. How do you decide whether just to let that be or whether to offer anything?
I don't know. It's informed by the moment, right? Like most people don't change because we say something to them. So as a general rule, that's probably one to always have run in. To me, it's more the energetics of your presence with that person who's chronically running something that you're perceiving to be unhealthy or unwise or whatever. I'll give you a funny example of this. It's in my book. So my mother was the greatest love I've known and the greatest pain. Um, Highly psychic. She and I are very similar, and she never found discipline. So she never learned how to regulate what she was connected to. And it burned her up, and it had her be incredibly violent verbally sometimes. Incredibly effective, like just rip your skin off. Nothing she's saying is not true. Like it's just like, anyway, it's that kind of stuff. And so this particular day, my son, who's going to be 30 on Monday, was a baby, and he was taking a very brief nap, which those were always brief. And my mom was over visiting, and she was just in one of her moods, and she was just ripping me. I now was still in my awakened state. I was practicing heart math, certainly. Um, and as she just tore into me with such brutality, I only could feel love for her. And I just radiated unconditional love as she ripped me apart. And then, I don't know, about a minute or two into her ranting, she literally just stops. And if you know my mother, getting her to stop talking, particularly when she's on a roll, I mean, that is definitely some kind of intervention. Anyway, she stops and she goes, honey, either you've just had an orgasm, you're on some kind of drug, or this heart love stuff you've been talking about really works.
Wow.
She could feel it. And what she needed in those moments of ravaging darkness was love. And upon receiving the energy of that, she could stop.
Wow.
That's a lot more effective than trying to tell her to stop.
Because some people would say walk away, you know, set your boundary of what standard of behavior you'll accept.
Yeah. And I've done that too with her.
Hmm.
But embodying the love of God right? Divine love, not human love, this highest frequency love, learning how to do that. And then connecting to the energy of that, particularly when something is hard, I think is the point. I think it's actually why we've come here is to learn how to do that. And I think that's what all the great master teachers have taught is, love God with all your heart and embody that love and be kind and loving to other people.
And honest,
I mean, yeah,
brutally
all
honest.
ethical guidelines that are in all of the teachings, right? They all say the same things.
They all say the same thing. Yes.
Right. We should take comfort in that. Like, wow, there's not a competition here. They're actually all affirming each other. They all have Messiah stories. They all have creation stories.
They all have
They're-
simple rules to live by.
Right.
And that's actually where I've gotten the most distracted, I think, is thinking that there's no such thing as right or wrong. Like in tolerance and permission and consent culture, that, you know, it's when I look at across the world religions and they all have a pretty basic set of rules about how across generations we can build healthy communities, they all look the same. We don't have to reinvent it.
Nope. Yeah. And we need to stop killing each other about it. Like, my God's better than your God. And, oh, this is my holy place. You can't be in my holy place. I mean, what a bunch of nonsense. And so out of integrity with the teachings, right? Like, anyway,
Wow. Ah, so tragic magic. You finished it.
I did. It's right here,
Yay. And
coming out
does it
on
have any
Monday.
subtext? Does it have
It
any
just says
like
it just says a memoir
a
in my,
memoir?
yep. And then I dedicated it to my mom. It says, to my mother, my first and most impactful teacher, je t'aime infiniment, which means I love you infinitely. Uh, she spoke French, and we always wrote letters to each other every day in French, and that's how we always ended. Yeah, if I needed her to know where I was sneaking out to, or anyway, the way that I could know that only she was reading my writing was to write in French, because only she and I knew how to speak it. So, anywho, and yeah, and some wonderful acknowledgments from other authors. Bruce Cryer, who was one of the co-creators of HeartMath and their CEO for a very long time, uh, read the story and wrote a beautiful, beautiful praise, as did a couple of other authors that I really respect. So that was a lot to, receive. And I wrote it hoping it helps.
Ah, well, I know our time here has really helped me today. And the ending of the book, I'm not going to give it away. It's worth reading to the end, even though I haven't read it. We've talked a little bit about this amazing series of events that you've chronicled as your spiritual journey. And you have a yoga center. You're in Missouri. You're outside of St. Louis. You said Franklin County.
Yeah, I live in Washington. It's a beautiful historic community right on the Missouri River. I live away from the river about 10 miles. And I've got 10 acres and this huge garage that I converted into a yoga center here. You can get
Almost like
a
hold
little
on,
bit of
let
a
me
glimpse.
pin. Oh, wow. That would looks more like an airplane hangar than a garage, dude. That's
Yeah, it's big.
gorgeous. Oh, I can't wait to see it myself.
Yeah. So I teach yoga here as an active service. I don't charge. I teach heart math. I do charge for that. I teach my Ready to Awaken coursework here. I have private clients, both yoga and what I call inner life coaching. So helping people really create a practice and stick with it. Um, yeah, and yeah, sometimes we do like five rhythms kind of dance here, and I don't know. I don't know what else we'll be doing, but it'll be fun. And oh, I do medicine work here. I have medicine women that I really respect that have been out here now 6 times, supporting people in that kind of journey work. So yeah.
How exciting. How
Hey.
exciting. Regan, I'm just so happy to see all the things that you've been creating and glad to share them here. Thank you for sharing them here with our audience. And we'll be putting your links in the show notes.
Okay,
And the
great.
main thing is the website, regancaruthers.com, Instagram, Regan Caruthers. We'll put those in the show notes. Also, we'll put the title of the book, Tragic Magic, that's coming out Monday, November 4th, 2024. Any last words?
Just thank you. Love you. Happy to do this again. If you want to have another conversation about anything, I would love to do it. And come visit.
Oh, and I would love that. And I can't wait. All right.
Okay. All right. Mwah.
Bye,
Love
dear.
you.
Mwah. Bye.
Bye.